welcome everybody to this Interintellect Super Salon with Christine Emba and Shadi Hamid. Both of you are returning guests, which is a good sign. You had a good time on Interintellect and now you're back. I'm mesmerized by the range of topics that you've been covering on Interintellect so far. Christine, actually, you both write for the Washington Post. I think most of you here are familiar with your work. And both of you are authors of very important books. The Problem with Democracy is something that we actually discussed in Interintellect recently. And Christine, you came to the community, I think 2 years ago with Rethinking Sex. And we had a little bit of a spicy conversation about Aristotle, as one does. And you also hosted beautifully a super salon with Jennifer Banks about her book called Natality, where we talked about the philosophy of birth. And it was one of the most beautiful conversations I think that ever took place on Interintellect. Today we will talk about men. With men, it's amazing. We will get first-hand information on Wisdom of Crowds and in the Washington Post. Multiple beautiful pieces were published about what's going on with men and whether we can help with strong, good archetypes in how the contemporary man thinks about himself. This is a very timeless and almost classicist attitude to the question, definitely not something that you would read in probably most left-wing outlets. And so I think it's fair to ask the most obvious question first, which is there a crisis of masculinity? And if so, why?
Well, so I mean, I can I can start with that since, I did write an essay literally entitled, oh, I see I see Luke's comment, spicy already. That I wrote a piece entitled Men Are Lost. I do think that there's a crisis of men, or at least masculinity happening in this moment. And I think I define that crisis exactly as I say in the title. I feel like many modern men are in a both sort of spiritually and literal sense lost, unsure of what it means to be a man in this moment, unsure of what real masculinity looks like, or if it even is real, if it's a positive thing. And I think more than women in this moment, actually, just sort of unsure of where they fit. And the data does really lay this out pretty clearly. I mean, we can say, of course, that this sort of fascination with like, oh no, what's wrong with men? Are men lost? Has been a recurring theme in sort of American and almost Western history. But at this point in time, we're also seeing markers of crisis. So, the concept of deaths of despair, excess deaths that are caused by actions of despair, suicide, drug overdose, or alcohol-induced illness, basically. Those have been rising in the United States to a surprising degree. The term itself was coined by Angus Deaton, who won a Nobel Prize for it a few years ago. But 3 out of 4 of these excess deaths are men. So highly overrepresented. Men are especially overrepresented in suicides. When it comes to sort of achievement, men, and especially young men, prime working age men from 25 to 34, are showing excess dropout from the labor force and from employment markets. There was a drop in college enrollment and college completion during the pandemic that startled kind of everyone and has mostly been recovered from. But in hindsight, the data shows that 70% of those college dropouts were young men. And then you can kind of see that culturally too. You're seeing the rise of these, in my view, rather pernicious influencers, people like Andrew Tate, who have appeared and are gaining great fame, ostensibly teaching men, and especially young men, how to be, for better or for worse. And, when I talk to young men and even just hang out with some of the men I know in my vicinity, there does seem to be this sense of, the economy has changed, the social moment has changed, definitions of gender and sexuality have changed. Where do I fit in? What am I supposed to be doing? And I think that does lead to a sense of crisis. Shadi, what do you think? Men okay? Thumbs up,
Talking
thumbs
about
down for
positive
men?
influencers.
Okay, but before I say my own piece, Christine, you said that you notice this also with men in your vicinity, and we're, I guess, in the same social circle and have a lot of the same friends. I mean, what is your sense of what you see among DC elites? Because when we talk about the crisis of men, I think we tend to think about more working class men, especially working class white men. And let's be honest, that's not really who most of us know in DC. And I presume that many of you live in major urban centers. So I'd just be curious, Christine, what you would say about that.
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. And so I was speaking in kind of generalities, and this sort of idea of crisis or sense of confusion shows up differently in different sort of social classes, in different racial groups, in different places, definitely. I think you're right. When it comes to sort of working class men, and especially working class white men, the economic factors, the transition from a sort of labor heavy and more stable, like range of jobs to a I guess more degreed credentialed workforce has been particularly hard for that region. But I mean, even in interviews, yes, with urban elites, it may be less a sense of economic dislocation, as a sense of almost social psychic dislocation in some sense. So, first there's one place where this is very easily observed for me, I think. And I think I noticed this actually when I was researching and doing interviews for Rethinking Sex, and it like slowly has begun to coalesce over the years. Um, Rethinking Sex was a book about sort of the sexual and romantic landscape and how many people seem dissatisfied by it. And I would talk to women, and women had actually pretty clear and specific complaints, especially sort of in reference to Me Too and the Me Too moment and consent. And when I talked to men, their complaints were more like, oh, well, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Like, what am I even allowed to do anymore? Post Me Too, like, do I ask out girls? Do I not ask out girls? One guy told me that talking to a girl, like asking out a woman at work, was akin to handing someone a loaded shotgun. It was just like too dangerous, and he wasn't going to do it. Which I was like, that's extreme and seems like a not great mental place to be in.
You're definitely not supposed to do that at work. I mean, having just started a new job, like I'd be very reticent to ask someone who I'm like on the same floor with, but anyway, that's
Let's
like a
get back
legit.
to that.
Okay.
That's interesting to me. But in another sense, yeah, there was this sort of like, oh, like I'm lonely, I'd like to have a relationship, but I don't know how to meet people. I don't know how to ask someone out, or like how to kind of have friends. There was a group of guys who I talked to, and who I've written about elsewhere. Sort of the incel movement is its own crisis space. But even in real life, like even in this sort of peer group where I was interviewing, it's like, oh, well, I don't know, I could get out and do something, but like I just watch a lot of porn actually, and I don't feel motivated to interact, which doesn't seem great, even for someone who has like a great job, whatever income, is an urban elite. Like that doesn't seem like a good space to be in. And then you can also look at this from a political lens. So if urban elites are not necessarily, like falling off the map in terms of employment or education, perhaps, you are seeing them increasingly gravitating towards movements, whether it's, extreme right-wing movements, whether it's intriguingly libertarian spaces. Again, Andrew Tate is not just popular among working class men, and I went to a Jordan Peterson book signing. Like that was in DC. It was in downtown DC at like the Landmark Theater, and it was sold out. Um, there's this interest in movements and philosophies that seem either purposefully or as kind of a side intent to be reinforming a definition of masculinity that feels lost to these guys, whether it's getting involved in, the Proud Boys, or the number of guys I know who have just taken up lifting and drinking raw eggs, which exercise isn't bad necessarily, but this fascination with like bodybuilding and looks maxing or something to try and redefine masculinity for themselves in kind of strange ways. That's showing up even at the top of the economic ladder. And I mean, if we look at the political consequences of that, it could be worrying.
Okay, there's a lot of good stuff here. So
sorry, that was a ramble.
No, that was great. No, that's great. Well, first of all, I'll say that we're having this conversation at a weird time because I feel like I'm sort of shifting along the ideological or political spectrum as we speak. So before recent developments in the Middle East, I would have said that I was moving from left to right. Now I'm starting to feel like I'm moving from right towards the left. I don't want to say like, so I feel less sympathetic to what.
This is the best time for this salon then. This is the best time.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, you're catching, look, you're all catching me at a time of transition, like literally in real time. So I guess part of me is less sympathetic to right-wing cultural grievances today than I would have been like 6 months ago. I'm just so that's one thing to just keep in mind as we have this conversation. I guess part of what I'm trying to get at is a lot of the male grievances seem a little bit overwrought to me. Like when you actually think about real conflict, real violent conflict, and real grievance, there are real victims in the world, like whether it's in Ukraine or in Gaza and so forth. And so it just, there is something, I think, overindulgent about a lot of our culture war conversations here in the US, but maybe I'll feel differently, as we get closer to election time, and, maybe I'll be more domestically focused then. So just one thing, I guess I will say that I think that I'm somewhat insulated from some of the male victim mentality because I'm not white. I think if I was a white male, there would probably be a bigger chance that I would be lost. That's my sense. I feel that because I have other identities that are important to me, so Muslim, Arab, brownish, whatever it might be, that gives me a certain, it insulates me from some of this debate. And, I'm not like the most religious person, but I am definitely a believer. I am Muslim. My religion's important to me. So I think that helps as well. Now, if I was just like an ordinary, like white liberal dude in DC who's trying to be like on the dating scene and feels like, so one thing that we do know is that there is a political divergence in, my generation, millennials, where women in DC and in most major cities in America are increasingly, single women are increasingly moving to the left, or already have already have moved to the left, especially on social and cultural questions, where young men, even otherwise liberal young men, are not quite there. So we are seeing a kind of political gap emerging. And I'll just say, I'll be straight, I can say this even if it's public or whatever, but I've noticed this, like, as someone who has been single for at least part of the time, the past couple of years, there has definitely been a shift. There are things in dating that just simply wouldn't have occurred to me like when I first came back to DC after being in the Middle East for a while in 2014. This was just like not something I experienced. But now, especially like on a first date, I do feel that I have to be more careful about what I say about my own like moral and social and cultural commitments, because young women are increasingly woke, in quotation marks. And I can also, I suppose, say that I was in a quite serious relationship where the person in question was like super woke, and that actually was a major contributor to the demise of our relationship. So these are things that I think, so I do think there has been a shift. Now, let me try to bring this to more specifically to the crisis of men. I think one thing that's sort of like worth teasing out, how much of this is a crisis of men or masculinity versus a crisis of liberalism? Because I think a lot of what Christine was just talking about are actually like broader issues in our sort of environment that affect women as well. I mean, women aren't, or especially young women, aren't particularly happy either. And if we look at teenage American girls, the CDC report, which whatever people might have issues with how some of the phrasing these questions and self-reported stuff, but anyway, like it does appear to be the case that 1/3 of American teenage girls have seriously contemplated suicide, according to the recent CDC report. You see pretty high levels of dissatisfaction and depression and mental health issues also among older women, especially older white women. So I think that there's a lot going on here, and a lot of us feel spiritually and socially dislocated. And that's partly because we're living with less religion. There is a period of rapid secularization that is somewhat new to America. It's not new to Western Europe. Western Europe has been going through this since the 60s in a very profound way, but the drop in religiosity and church attendance and just basic observance from 2000, so relatively recently, right around like 9/11 to today, 22 years later, there has been just a precipitous drop, as many of you know, in religious identification and in church, mosque, synagogue attendance, but primarily church attendance. I mean, that's so, that to me is the broader kind of mood music for a lot of the dissatisfaction we have. And I'm tempted to say that one way of addressing this, if I had to speak to men and say, well, what do you do about this? I mean, I think religion is the easiest and probably the most compelling answer. If you're trying to find meaning in your own life, if you're trying to figure out how to be a man, because honestly, what's Jordan Peterson? Jordan Peterson is secular religion. It's Christianity, but basically secularized. Like, so we know what, yeah, so we know what the answer is. I think obviously it's hard for people to become religious just for purely instrumental reasons. So if you're someone who doesn't believe in God, and I'm telling you, hey, young man, join a religion, you might see that that's like, oh, okay. But then you try to join a religion, but you find that you're not able to actually believe. Like it's hard to force religious belief, even if you think it would make your life better. So that's a challenge, I think.
I'm really curious. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, I have some thoughts on that, but I want to hear your question first.
Let's hear your thoughts, and then I will add one more question before I open to the audience.
Well, yeah, I mean, so there was a lot there. And I think I agree with what you're saying on a number of points. So I think that this political divide is actually really important. Women are getting younger, and single women especially, you're right, are getting more liberal. Even over the past year, in some ways, as a response to the Dobbs decision and other decisions, men are either staying in the same place or becoming more conservative leaning. And some posit that this is, in fact, due to the fact that in many sort of conservative leaning spaces, there does seem to be sort of a clearer and more positive vision of masculinity in males and the role that men can play. Josh Hawley's sort of like men need to rebuild America. Various right-wing influencers who pretty much everyone who talks about masculinity in this moment feels like they're right-coded or admits to being conservative in some way. And so instead of saying, masculinity is toxic, which I think a lot of men feel like they're hearing from the left, they're hearing men are great, men are good, men should be doing even better than they are from the right, and that's attractive to them. And I think there's something interesting to that. I think the question of religion is an interesting one, because part of what I have heard in my interviews and in research about this sort of crisis of masculinity is, for young men, a crisis um, of role models and connection. So, as one guy who I wrote about in my essay and who I talked to and have stayed in touch with told me, I didn't have a great relationship with my father. When I talk to my friends, I feel like I can count on one hand the number of guys who have good relationships with their dads. Like, there's no one to show us how we're supposed to be. And I think in the past, being a part of a religious community or other community would provide you with more role models, like more people you could be around, more men you could be around, more friends your own age who, might help you out of this rut of disconnection and loneliness, and also give you a clearer idea of what to aspire to. And as people have become disconnected from that, really what used to be a really important sense of community, I think you're seeing a loss there. But then on the other hand, when you think about male influencers or the people who seem to be defining masculinity in the public square right now, one of the things that actually worries me a bit is that they are so a-religious, or not even a-religious, amoral. So you think about a figure like Andrew Tate, say, or like, BAP, Bronze Age pervert, and the vision of masculinity that they describe, that they put forward as positive, and which people are resonating with, is one that's not tied to faith at all, of course. In fact, it's Nietzschean. It views Christianity as being for weaklings. The idea of like sacrificing for someone else as being something that stupid sheep do, and ties the idea of masculinity and being a man to being kind of the best, like, savage on the block, basically. It's about beating other people, being on top, winning over other men and women, ideally, to grab what you can for yourself. If you look at Andrew Tate, it's not like he's telling people to go, although he did convert to Islam, which is interesting, but like, in what sense did he really do that? Not necessarily telling people to, like, go submit themselves to God and the religious life. They're just saying, like, acquire women, acquire cars, like, be like the marauding warrior that you should be in your heart, and that's what being a man is. And if that's the vision of masculinity that we're aspiring to, or that has become the norm, I find that worrying, and I don't know that the religion cure is going to solve it.
One thing I'll just say until you step in is there is something interesting about how a lot of the manfluencer scene, I think that's the term that Christine, I don't know if she coined it, but it's a good term to describe this kind of
I think I did,
emerging
actually.
Oh wow, okay, there you
I'm
go.
claiming it. I'm claiming manfluencer.
You guys are the
Yes.
witnesses that this was Christine who said it first, and it immediately picked up. So it's part of the
Yeah.
language now. Oxford Dictionary.
Yeah. So there is something weird about how, I mean, the whole part of the right wing worldview is usually that don't see yourself as a victim, stop complaining, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Like, that is traditionally a conservative leaning set of arguments. But it's interesting that the new right has taken on a kind of victimhood complex and a language of seeing themselves as being aggrieved, which is normally what you would associate with the left. So just interesting to me that everyone wants to be a victim now. We just want to be victims in different ways.
Yeah, you hear a lot of, I mean, it's interesting. Like, if you watch, Peterson, for instance, there's a lot of, in 12 Rules for Life, the thing was sort of, stand up straight with your shoulders back, like, take responsibility for yourself, which, don't be a victim. On the other hand, it's all the feminists did this to you, the liberals did this to you, the liberals are taking things from you, which is very much, it seems to me, the victim mentality that he is ostensibly putting down on the other side of his mouth.
I guess I just, I don't know if I have a lot of tolerance for, like, life in America is pretty damn good, like, all things considered. And I guess I don't know if I have a lot of patience for, like, folks on either the left or the right who catastrophize like what we're all going through. Yes, I mean, at some basic level, life is difficult. There is suffering in life. And I think everyone just wants, like, just people just have to grow up at some level. It's just like really like you live under a democracy for all of its faults. You don't live under a dictatorship. You don't live in a conflict zone. Just grow up and live. Just try to live the best you can and stop complaining all the time.
So that's an interesting response. And to be clear, I agree with you. It's funny because it is in some ways like not a mirror to, but it's parallel to the response that I have gotten from a lot of women after writing this piece, who are like, men are complaining. Why? Because they like finally have to compete against a woman in their college class and they're like not as good as she is. So sad, like call the ambulance, this is not a real problem. Like, oh no, men suddenly like have to be on an even men are no longer like immediately given the advantage, even though they are in a lot of spaces. Like in the S&P 500, I note this in the piece, there are more men named Michael and John in the S&P 500 than there are women total, like at all. Like men are doing fine is what people say in response to this. And I think that's true. Like, I think that's objectively, like, yes, these men, like, they still live in America. They haven't fallen off a cliff. Like, they have their limbs, most of them. Like, as a general rule, they are doing fine. And men at the top, yeah, as Jacob just pointed out, men at the top are actually doing great still and will continue to be at the top of the economy, be at the top of the labor ladder, etc. But
Jacob is right. So Jacob's previous comment, it is a little bit insensitive or unfair for me to be like, because if they are like, if we're thinking about like practically what do we do about all this, like it's not going to be very effective for me to speak to men and tell them, hey, like you guys, yeah,
man up.
So there is a kind of tension here between like the analysis. Like ultimately, I'm not a Jordan Peterson figure. I'm not going and speaking to men and trying to make their lives better. I'm an analyst, I'm a writer, I comment on what I see. So there is a tension here between how we analyze and what we would actually tell these, disadvantaged or depressed men, like if we actually encounter them. And I'm sure that if I had a friend who was really struggling, and felt dislocated in part because he was a man, I'd probably have different advice for him. I wouldn't just say grow up,
And the other thing is, actually, again, this is sort of like a political and empathetic question. Like, yes, if these are people who you care about, if they feel bad, even if it's like kind of unjustified to you, like you still want to address that. Like the way that they are feeling is real to them. And whether you agree with it or not, like this feeling of dislocation, this feeling of loss, this resultant feeling of anger, whether it's justified or not, like will still spill out and have, political and social implications for the rest of us, whether it's justified or not. Like we can say, like, men, you're not suffering at all. Like you're doing fine, men, whatever, grow up. Meanwhile, like an incel who has decided from himself that he is dissatisfied is still going to go shoot up a yoga class of girls. Like whether we agree with his grievance or not, that grievance is still there and continues to have an impact on us. And if that's the case, which it is, then it is something that's worth addressing. Like we live in a society, which is a thing that, I always am saying. And we do have to care about, or at least be aware of and responsive to the sort of feelings and state of the other people around us, whether we agree with them or not, because we continue to interact.
I had a conversation a couple of years ago with somebody about Jordan Peterson, where I have maybe a more nuanced view. I watched a lot of his old videos and found them very interesting. He didn't talk about liberalism. He didn't talk about feminism directly. He was a Jungian psychologist, to my best knowledge.
It really changed, yeah.
Greatly reminded me of my professors in Budapest. Like, I studied humanities in Budapest in like a post-Marxist institution, and that was like that. Like, this is the European thought, right? And then it's very interesting to me how he, who had researched populist movements and wrote and spoke extensively about like Hitler's speeches that at the beginning were kind of vanilla, and then he was listening to what makes the crowd roar, wisdom of crowds, and he would just amplify that messaging until 10 years later, it was completely unrecognizable compared with his origins. And it was strange to me to observe Peterson, who was aware of this effect, to go through something similar. That said, I had a conversation a couple of years ago with this guy. He's very, very anti Jordan Peterson, because apparently that's a thing. You can identify as anti-Jordan Peterson in this life. God bless liberal democracies where you can do that. And he was just like, why do people listen to him? When I have these questions, I just talk to my dad or my brother. And I was like,
that's why.
Because they don't have it. That's why. They don't have it. We are descendants of, boomers who did, got a divorce the first chance they could, or were working all the time. And there are swaths of young men who just don't have anybody to talk to about these things. And I can imagine that with YouTube's algorithm and all this kind of outrage machine, you find yourself listening to maybe less PC influencers in a couple of matter of hours, probably. But I want to talk to you a little bit, guys, about one of my favorite topics, which is the vanity of the small difference. Because there are evolutionary theorists who will argue that in eras where it pays out from an evolutionary point of view for the man and the woman to greatly differ from each other, the physicalities will be very different. But in wealthy, comfortable, peaceful Western societies where we all have the same job with a laptop, we will have smaller differences, and we will have to more aggressively defend our territory if we posit that there are territories that genders inhabit. And as at the beginning, as you guys were talking, I immediately thought of the fertility question, and can the crisis of masculinity be just about people not having kids, right? When you're a dad to a kid, it kind of answers some fundamental questions about masculinity and your role in the household, since you are probably not the person carrying the child and giving birth, but you might have the majority of the economic burden of the household on your shoulders for the first couple of years. But as Shadi was, as you were talking, I thought, well, war is the same, right? There are these great matters of life and death that stop this kind of congregating in the middle, washing up so many of the differences, making it almost like an opt-in, opt-out. Like, I have an opt-in, opt-out femininity in so many different ways, right? I decide how feminine I want to look, how long my hair should be, how much I'm showing off my body, how I use my voice. But there are situations, like if I found myself, pregnant and I wanted to have that baby, this opt-in, opt-out thing would just go away. And I'm sure if you were a Ukrainian man in January 2022, you had a sort of opt-in, opt-out masculinity with your girlfriend, with your friends. You could tease each other. When you are being mobilized to defend your country against invaders, that's a little bit of a different question, right?
Yeah.
No one in Ukraine is like debating like trans rights. Like, that's just
no one you follow on Twitter.
Yeah, no. Are you? A Slavic friend who I was talking to was like, well, Ukraine is going to be the one country that doesn't have a fertility crisis in 10 years. Because everyone knows what they're doing there.
Look, if you've ever grieved,
it's right.
you know that you want to make babies immediately, and this is actually to me, it's we always talk about the sexual revolution and its malcontents, but there's something about our extremely long lifespans which keep us as children until, look at King Charles, right? Until late into life, that I think also lowers people's willingness to take on responsibilities. But yeah.
Yeah,
Ukraine is fine. Like people are getting married with the Kalashnikovs. They are fine.
I just saw those two comments in the chat that men find a sense of purpose or they become a problem. And I think that that is right. Or at least that is kind of what.
Jacob, well done. That's amazing.
Yeah, that's a great
Jacob
point.
always has the
I really
best
think that's
comments. I
right.
love it. So good.
I like this idea that there's three options for men: war, fatherhood, or problem. That's
Well,
Lucas. I mean, that's a good way of
Kind of
putting it.
it's kind of our title, right?
Yeah.
But there used to be solutions to this, right? Like there was the clergy, and not just in Christianity. Like every major religion had the option for surplus men and women who could not find a partner to at least temporarily get off the market.
Yeah.
Or you sent them like Stendhal, the red and black, right? Red is the army, black is the church. Like, oh, you have a third son and he's not going to inherit anything. Bye. Then we shipped them off to New Zealand. We were like, go and find some gold. And now we're like,
go do something.
So have you heard of Pornhub? Now that's our solution.
So
okay,
actually,
I don't know who was making.
Oh, well, no, I was just gonna make one point that was related to this sort of like opt-in, opt-out question that this description that you have that I think is really interesting. I talked to and did like some anthropological research for this piece too. And one of the things that pretty much all like anthropologists not all, I mean, the field has changed a lot, but traditionally anthropologists have recognized in the study of gender that in almost every community, there's usually like a sort of initiation process for masculinity, and there isn't one for femininity, because women become identified as women because they start having periods and then they're able to become pregnant, and everyone knows like that means that you're a woman, that you can play this role. How you do it is up to you, but like that's the thing. For men, it's not
also
so
in
clear. Also in Barbie.
Barbie happens to women when you're 13 and a half.
Yeah, usually.
I mean,
although
if you
that's
have access to healthcare, and yeah, of course.
No, but I mean, but actually that the age of puberty is moving earlier for women.
Oh.
But for men, because it's not as obvious, societies have tended to have like an initiation type thing where like men are taken by older men or elders in the community out into the wilderness to like prove themselves in some way by fighting, by going to war, by bringing something back for their community. And that's how they become men. And like David Gilmour talks about how, again, femaleness is kind of almost self-defined, but masculinity has often been proven by filling the role of provider, procreator, what is the other? Protector. And so, yeah, those are the roles. It's like going to war, becoming a dad.
It's like you have to find a job. Like women,
you have to like
you get
find
handed a job,
to do.
You can decline it. But if you're a dude, you have to go out, leave the village, and in
the modern moment, like those roles are so much less defined. Exactly, like you can switch between them. Women can do all of them too. Women don't need men even to procreate necessarily. Like women are, in many cases, are making as much as or more than men. So there's, for a lot of men, I think, a sense of like, oh, what am I supposed to be doing? And actually the sort of dark response coming from these sort of more intense masculinity thinkers or theorists on the sort of far right, it's like, well, we just need a good war. Actually, we should go to war to recreate the vitality of men. And yeah. Anyway,
Well,
Jacob has had his hand up for like a long time, though. I see it. What's up?
I kind of wanted to take a different tack. There's so many different ways to go here, but I mean, we've been talking a lot about like let's say the macro philosophical implications of this crisis of masculinity. I wonder if we take a different tact and we like kind of zoom in on the micro, if that would be instructive in sort of a different way. And so, I mean, I'm just going to kind of talk and see if I can get to a point in a not so verbose way. But I mean, we do have a basic set of needs, right? A need for connection, a need for intimacy. We alluded to the need for spirituality. there is this Jungian idea, right, that in the West, a lot of religion has disappeared, and a lot of the ways that we find that spiritual fulfillment is through our intense romantic relationships, which creates other problems too. But at least there is this idea that we have this basic need for connection and intimacy and spirituality. And if a man or anybody is not getting that, and the question is, let's say they're unhappy. They're unhappy because in a specific case, they have a lack of intimacy, a lack of connection. The question then becomes, do they know that or not? Well, because if they don't know that, then we can very easily project this on the outside world. We go looking for groups to belong to, and suddenly we feel better when we join one of these extremist groups because we have a sense of connection, a sense of intimacy with the group. And it's not because of the beliefs, right? It's because we now then belong to a group. But if I can look inside myself and say, actually, you know what? The problem here is that I don't have enough intimacy. I don't have enough connection. The question then becomes, do I have the skills to find that in an effective way, right? Do I have the skills to make friends? Do I have the skills to build relationships? And for me, at least, my father was both a good and a bad role model. I coach mentor a lot of younger kids, like 25, right, that have had less professional success, and some older people that are my age. And a lot of the men around me struggle with just building friendships, not to mention intimate relationships, right? I didn't have a very good father that really educated me in this more emotionally intelligent way. And then on top of this, if we want to make friendships, or especially if we want to get intimate, it's often the differences that attract us, right? This masculine, feminine polarity, whether the man is playing the masculine or feminine role or whatever, right? But it is that difference that attracts us. And having this, can I recognize what the problem is, why I feel bad, right? If I don't, what are the consequences? If I do I have the skills to actually do that? And that's a lot of what I work on people with now is just those skills to intentionally create that sense of connection and intimacy, and not project that discontent on the outside world. So I could say a lot more, but I don't know if there's anything interesting within what I just said.
Yeah.
No,
So
go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just saying, like, on the point of intimacy, I think one thing that just like worth like discussing explicitly is there is the free marketization of sex, where you have winners and losers. If you think about a distribution, the winners don't take all, but they take a lot. So, you know, the top 10% most attractive, interesting, high status guys, they're the ones who, like, so women are basically funneling towards those 10%. And then a lot of people get left behind. And this is a theme that I think the French novelist Michel Houellebecq, all of his novels are pretty much about this. That I would, for those of you who haven't read his work, I would highly recommend The Elementary Particles, which is really in large part about this dynamic. And then you have a lot of,
we will do a group therapy. Like, you guys read it, and then we will do like a care session where we just listen to music and remind ourselves that life is beautiful and people are good.
Yeah.
and so this free marketization of sex is going, well, first of all, dating apps is a big part of this, because part of the frustration now for a lot of men is that there's an illusion that there are all these attractive women out there. That is basically the message that are being sent right when they go on Tinder or Bumble or whatever it might be. So you have the illusion that you have all this opportunity, but then you find out most men actually don't get a lot of matches. And there's been a lot of like interesting work done on like the dating app dynamics. So that creates this sort of like profound dissonance. And then, you know, that does hurt your sense of self and so forth. And, you know, and this is going on at the same time that a growing number of these men are not religious. So if they were religious, again, there would be a sort of maybe not ideal solution, but a solution, which is if you grow up in a conservative Muslim community, you're, you know, you might slip here and there, but generally you're trying not to have sex before marriage. And you are having your family encouraging you to get married to someone else in the community. in some cultures, not Arab culture, but in kind of Indian and Pakistani culture, you have the option for arranged marriage, or at least the very least, you have facilitated marriages. So someone is keeping an eye out for you, and it may not be the most ideal person, but someone will be like, funneling marriage opportunities to you, right? But without that, you have to fend for yourself, and not everyone is going to be good at fending for themselves. Just as in a capitalist society, not everyone is going to be good. Not everyone's going to come out of that in a very strong position. Now, in a capitalist society, you're going to have some social protections. You have a social safety net, but there isn't an obvious social safety net for the losers of love and sex and intimacy. There's no subsidy that is being provided by the government, and there shouldn't.
It's pornography.
Oh yeah, I suppose. Yeah, there you go. But that's not.
And you will
really
have the dolls.
It's not a great substitute. I agree. Yeah. No, I think that's a really important point, actually. I mean, there's this illusion, first of all, that there are all these beautiful women out there who are having sex, but not with you. They're all having it with Chad. And so it makes you feel really bad about yourself. And also, I think just like the thing about dating apps generally for men and for women is that like you experience a lot of rejection, like in the moment. And like most people actually, like, I don't know that our nervous systems were brought up to be just like sexually rejected 40 times in an afternoon. If you're a guy who's like swiping through matches and you're seeing that no one's matching with you, and it's just like, this person doesn't like me and that person doesn't like me and this person doesn't like me and I want that person, I can't have that person. And like that seems psychologically damaging in its own way and can lead to a lot of bad outcomes. Definitely, I think that's true. And to Jacob's point, like if you actually like talk to people who have done the reporting and research, and also members of like these extreme groups, like the Proud Boys, who I've mentioned a couple of times, like that was originally started out not as a political organization, but it was supposed to be a social club for men. Like it was just a place for community, for like men to find like-minded friends and like do man things together. And then it turned into this whole other thing. And like I noticed going to the Peterson thing that like part of the enjoyment of the people around me for being there, like, yeah, they got like some good advice from early Jordan Peterson, but it was also just like, oh, like we're all surrounded by dudes, we're all dudes here to do this thing together. And like there was a sense of being sort of part of the hive that was really comfortable. So I think that lack of community, and then the like not knowing how to find it or how to make it, also stems from lack of role models who teach you how to be in community with others, because that's a learned thing. And I don't know, I'm sometimes accused of being gender essentialist, but I do think this is true, that women tend to be more socially apt by nature than men do, and find it easier to form these friendships and like tend to have more close friends than men do. Lucas has been waiting for a while. And then we should talk about some positive stuff too.
I would like to just add a note to what you were talking about, Christine, because this is something that you explore in your book, and this resonated with me so much. We did a salon.
Please buy my book.
Buy the book. It's behind. We did a salon a couple of years ago with Catherine D, who was also at the Novi Tate conference, and we were it was almost like a venting session in the form of a salon where everybody just came together, and we were like, everything that they are telling us about dating is wrong. Like nobody thinks those things that they tell you that everybody thinks. Nobody likes the things that they tell you all the girls like. Cosmopolitan lied to us. Teen Vogue lied to us. Instagram is lying to us. And we were like, and you have this weird cognitive dissonance where you feel alone with your own experience. And I'm sure this is the same for men as well. Like how many people tell you how men are? And I'm like, often from people who spoke to like one person. And I really loved when your book came out and kind of verbalized this really weird cognitive dissonance when you feel alone with something and then you realize it's extremely common. Is just they make you feel so uncool that you don't really share it, right? Which is just normal human decency. And what you said, that we are not biologically equipped to deal with so much rejection all the time, because we socialized with groups and then we migrated and then we met with the other group, and there was always some kind of group interplay around romance, right? When you got married or you had babies, you were not fully left alone to your own devices in a single family home with a car and like solve it. But in all your jokes and your conflicts, you had other people involved. Somebody could go to you and say, you look tired, or is everything okay? Do you need help? And you know, your notes on decency and how I think we're also not equipped with so many failed first dates, the same way as we're not equipped with, I think, with our just cognitive models for job interviews. You know, it's just, these are very, you formulate some kind of attachment and then you cut it immediately, and then you will never, ever, ever see this person again. I mean, Interintellect was born out of my triple immigrant weirdness over how, you know, I was going to all these events in London, and you always try to make friends and you have long conversations with people and you open up and you listen to the person and you remember, and then you will never, ever, 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 ever see this person ever again, even if you try. And then what happens is you burn out so fast and you become this kind of walking shell of a person who pretends, who does the sales part of networking, dating, intimacy, but there's nothing inside. And so I'm all for that kind of essentialism that says we need the content. You can't just continue performing the dances of courtship, of family, of love, or democracy, or community without actually there being something inside. And as I said in the chat, one thing that kills men and women and everybody alike is loneliness. And the fact that we are not finding a common ground in our need for companionship and even just friendship, just the conversation. Like how many times it happens to a young woman who's like very, cagey about like men of her own age, because like, oh, everybody wants to hit on me, or oh, not everybody's hitting on me, why, bruhu. And then, there's this old guy and you strike up a conversation and you have an amazing long conversation about the First World War with this like 1,000-year-old guy who's just like, because you're not in the same market and you can connect as humans. I mean, I wrote a long piece about Despacito and why the video of Despacito is the most watched YouTube video. It looks like a very sexy song with like shaking booty, but in reality, it's like community. This woman walks into the community, makes friends with the kids and the old people, and then they get hitched, right? And then the next couple enters the scene and it continues. Like that should be the community, right? Like now it's your wedding and next week it's somebody else's. So I don't know. It's just a short, very long comment before to Lucas.
I've never watched the Despacito music video. I'm going to watch that like once we get off here.
And read my wonderful, the whole premise of my essay is that I thought this was about butts, but no, it's about like, and it's
Can you drop a link in the chat?
I will self-promote shamelessly, both here and in the YouTube comments.
Okay, so so there's two things I wanted to say. Well, actually three, but let's start with two of them. So first thing about, I really liked Anna's comment in the chat. They say monogamy was invented for men so that they all get wives. And I posted two links. There's one really good book that I read recently. It's called Female Choice. I think, unfortunately, the book is only in German. I don't think there's like an English version of it. But basically, that's basically that thesis, like explained like in a whole book, that basically like all of patriarchy and like all the development of society, and even the argument that like a stable society was basically built on this idea of designing society in such a way that we restrict women and give men the access to wives. And obviously the author isn't like in favor of that, but she says that we must kind of like rethink relationships, because now, after all this, what has happened in terms of like sexual revolution and equality, because there's a crisis and we can't go back, because that would mean like restricting women, but we have to go forward and we have to think of like how we organize society and our values. We have to think of it in very different ways. And the second thing that I wanted to mention, and I think we've talked a bit about role models and community. And one thing that I would be like very curious about is how important is it for men to have like all male community, like to be connected specifically with other men, maybe like a little bit older men as role models, but also like men of their own age. Because what I feel, and like from a personal perspective, I don't really see like the need for it. Like I have never like been to any like I have never done any social thing where I thought, okay, this would be better if there was only men and no women. But I think some of these things existed, and there was community for men. And I think one thing that also happened is that we tried to open up everything for women too, because we thought, oh, if we have community just for men, it's like this boys club that kind of like excludes women from certain important things, like certain conversations, certain opportunities that you get through networking. So basically the women were excluded. And so we open up these, and I think there's a bit of a, I think as a society, we think that, okay, yes, we accept that women need maybe sometimes safe spaces where there's only women, but if men want to be among themselves, it's a little bit sus, and maybe we have to think about that topic also, because I feel maybe for some men it's like really important to have this like male specific connection.
So I also saw that Trey made a comment along these lines in the chat. And I think I also find this question to be very interesting. And I didn't get into it as much as I wanted to in the essay. But a few quick thoughts, and I see Alan's hand too, so we're going to get him in a second. But to how important are role models really? There's a thesis, as it's generally understood among psychologists, that when it comes to like adverse childhood experiences, not like deeply adverse ones, but having like a tougher childhood, having fewer resources, etc. Girls are dandelions and boys are daisies, which is that it especially relates to the need for role models and parents and involved parents in like a stable family situation. If kids don't have that, girls suffer, but still often find ways to bounce back or like thrive despite that. Like they're dandelions growing through the cracks in the sidewalk. Like they still often make it. But when there's not a father figure or a stable family situation, boys in those households do really poorly. They are not resilient in the way that girls are. They're daisies. They just like kind of give up and die, and end up, in lives of crime or like not thriving in school. And just like their outcomes, if there's like a poor family situation, the boy will fall off and the girl will struggle, but has a much better chance of ending up okay. So it actually seems like role models are more necessary for men than they are for women, which is interesting. And that's just like what the data shows. And then the question about male only spaces, I would actually be curious, to hear from more of the men here about them, because I suspect, and from talking to men, that I do suspect that they are meaningful and useful in some ways, in part for this sort of like initiation into maleness by older men that doesn't take place as much now, but like still seems like something that a lot of young men are searching for and need. And also, as Anna was saying, if there are spaces for women that we find useful, it kind of makes sense that spaces for male socialization could also be useful. I'm like, the fact that the Boy Scouts is co-ed at this point doesn't actually seem like it's gonna be a great long-term choice for me.
I feel like Me Too is bringing back some modesty narrative that we didn't see before. Like so many like gyms that I go to these days, or yoga like has like women only spaces.
Yeah.
And I think it's an interesting side effect.
Yeah, and I mean, so there's that point. There's also the point that like, if you look at our society now, if you think about like the average boy in the United States, say we have like maybe for some reason that the number is slipping for me, but a strong percentage of kids who grow up in single family homes grow up with their mothers, the vast majority, in fact. Most teachers are female. Most sort of social workers and service workers are female. Like your doctor is likely to be, your nurse is likely to be a woman. Like even if you do go to school and you like play a sports team, because there's so few male teachers these days, like your football coach may also be a woman. There are just actually like more female role models in the spaces that like the average kid encounters than there are male role models. And like one wonders what effect that has. I think you're right, Lucas, that we pushed back against male-only spaces because in the past, when it did feel like men had all the power, and in some cases they still do, it felt like, oh, if there's a male-only, if only the men are allowed to go play golf, and that's where all the CEOs are, then only men are included. And that was true, and in many cases is still true. But I don't know. I wonder if there's a shift. Maybe there's still a need for this kind of space in this moment and what that might look like.
Well, there's a problem, I think, or maybe this is just me. Male only spaces are just kind of boring. Like I sort of share Lucas's, I don't know if that's what Lucas was getting at, but I just don't find them compelling, and I don't think I ever have. It's not something that I've been able to like relate to as a societal goal, but based on what I hear, it seems that some guys would really benefit from that or really want that. I just, yeah, I don't know. I would be curious how other people react to that. It is interesting that I don't know if this phrase is still used a lot, but you know, back when we were kids, we used to say that all male gatherings were sausage fests. And yeah, so I guess
you've never heard that, Hannah? I've heard that common usage where I come from.
Yeah, maybe it's more of an American, maybe it's just like a uniquely American phrase, but
I mean, at the end of Submission, right, the other Michelle Houellebecq book, when they kick out the women from the university, sorry, spoiler, then the parties are super boring.
Yeah, I think it's also an age.
They don't know how to talk to each other
too. Like maybe all male spaces are useful for, so like also in education, actually, like girls develop emotionally and mentally faster than boys in the classroom. And so like, is it more useful for boys to have like a boy classroom where they can like do their weird stuff and like not feel judged by like to the standard of like their female classmates who may be in a different developmental stage than they are? Like, I don't know. I think that the male only space actually seems much more useful for younger men than for like 50-year-old men. Like at that point, you should know how to move about in society. But
I would just add a note to that before I go to Anne, because I just don't want us to idealize the men-only spaces of the past, because they were not men-only. It just meant that your wife was not there. And that's a very, very different
True.
So when we are talking about the private club attendance, you know, in the UK or something, it just meant that they had hookers. So
it was men and prostitutes.
Not for personal growth. It was for reading the paper in the afternoon quietly and then get super drunk and have like girls, just as a parenthesis. It was more like Mad Men, men-only spaces than, I don't know, Quakers. Ella, go.
Yeah, so Shadi made an interesting point earlier on in the discussion where he said that he felt like he was sort of insulated from this crisis of masculinity because of his other identities that sort of allowed him to buoy above the water, I guess. And I wonder I think that seems to me to be the case for me as well. Like, I think that the fact that I have a strong religious identity or whatever it is allows me to escape from this crisis. And I wonder if part of the solution maybe is to promote these other strong identities. Obviously that doesn't mean that we should neglect solving the crisis of masculinity. I think it's much deeper than that. And it is important what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman. And it needs to be discussed. And that's obviously why we're discussing it. But like, I wonder if part of the solution is perhaps pushing these good, stronger identities, such as religion, some form of national identity, obviously not the kind that makes you hate other people, but some kind of national identity. I wonder if that's a solution, perhaps. And then on another point, Richard Reeves has this really interesting essay, and he's probably written about it elsewhere, about it's called Against Lone Ranger Masculinity, where he pretty much says like masculinity is defined relationally, and I think that's a very interesting point, and I think we need to keep that in mind as well in this discussion, is that like if we're not, like we need to see ourselves as part of a society, as Christine was saying, like we need to see ourselves in relationship to the other people in our society, not as sort of this separate little entity that's moving around all by itself. And our masculinity or our femininity or whatever, any identity needs to be defined in the context of the other people in the space around us. I thought that was a very perceptive point that he was making. And I think that often these discussions of masculinity talk about like, oh, we need to reclaim this strong man or whatever it might be. And it neglects to mention the fact that there's usually other people in these spaces that actually are important in helping us understand who we are as men or women or British or American or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think that's really key, and really important. I think that the sense of identity loss, like really when we talk about the crisis of masculinity or the crisis of men, like in some ways it is a crisis of men because it feels like it's men being affected in this moment, but it's not like men are being struck down by some outside force that attacks men only. It is that like there's a particular level of identity loss in that group that has to do with the identity that feels like it's sort of leaching away. Maybe it's just like particular definition of masculinity, but in the end, it really is just about that identity question. And like, even, yes, being able to identify yourself as a person in relation to other groups, like having more to yourself than just being like, I'm a man, maybe would do a lot to solve this crisis. I think you're totally right there. And yeah, I guess this question of like men defining themselves in community too also seems to relate back, and we all define ourselves in community, but I think that also relates back to what Anna and I were talking about again, this sort of like opt-in and opt-out thing. Like in some sense, women kind of maybe can in some ways actually define themselves absent of community in some ways. I mean, it's not ideal, but like there is still like sort of a signifier of being a woman, or like a capability that does not exist in the same way for men. And so in some way, maybe men are actually more dependent on outside feedback, community, society to define themselves as men, to define what masculinity looks like, to define themselves in relation to others.
It's so interesting. I always find myself when, I have a female friend with some relationship problem, and they somehow think that I am the right person to talk to about this. And then I listen. and almost in every case, when it's a long-term relationship and it's like two very benevolent people really trying their best, but something is off, it's too boring, too exhausting, not enough time together, too much time together, whatever is the problem. I always like the first thing that comes to my mind is always like, give the guy a job. What is his job in this? What does he do? He doesn't know what he does. Of course, it's like, of course, it's unpredictable and feels unstable. And I find that, it's the same for women. Before you settle down, you need to figure out what your role in society is. But it sounds like it does come maybe more easily for women to find their roles after they have settled down. But for men, it's like, and many times I find through my friends that the man has found the job, but he's just like not allowed to do that. Mm-hmm. And as somebody who like lead the team, when you teach, the first thing you notice is if somebody has a zone of genius, so to speak, and they're really good at it, like let him do it. If he's an excellent caretaker, if he is a great cook, if he just wants to build his own fucking house, let him do it. Because you can stop him, but then you will have to figure out, okay, then what else is his job? And this is, maybe this is a millennial thing, maybe this is a we're near 40 thing, but I see this problem over and over and again. And maybe I will just make a t-shirt and I will approach with a rosé and just like give the t-shirt, give the guy a job. He doesn't know what to do, or you don't let him do it. And this is, I don't know. Well, how does this sound to the group?
Yeah, can the men give us some feedback? Like, what do men need? Tell us. And how do you define yourself? How do you guys define yourself as
Way to end up
men,
in
if you
Christine's new
do?
book.
Actually, no, I'm actually like genuinely interested in this, because like one thing about me writing about the problem of masculinity and people being like, Christine, like, have you solved it? You're like, men are lost. Have you found them? It's like, I get fine. I'm not a man. Like this, I can say as much as I want, but in the end, I'm not a man, and it is helpful to hear from men.
I love it. I told you that Mason Hartman and I wanted to do a podcast where the title was just going to be "Man, Why?" All caps. We didn't do it. I think she figured it out. I haven't yet.
Please, men. Yeah. Who are your role models? What does being a man mean? What would you tell these men who are lost, and/or do you feel like you're lost yourself? We'll cut the we won't post this part on YouTube. Just tell us your deepest secret.
Shadi, who's your role model? You can kick it
Yeah.
off.
Yeah, Shadi, yeah.
My role model? Honestly, the question really hasn't. You mean like I presume you mean a male role model?
Yeah.
No one's ever asked me that before. It hasn't even occurred to me to even come up with an answer. I'd have to think about it.
How did you come to an understanding of yourself as a man? Or do you understand yourself as a man, and why?
Okay, again, like this it hasn't been an issue for me, so it's not something I've ever really sought out. I do have a close relationship and friendship with my father. That could be part of it, maybe. And he never seemed to really have a problem with it, with being a man. I don't know. Yeah, I wish I had a better answer. Barack Obama comes to mind. As someone who could be potentially like a father, like a male role model. I think maybe someone referred to Obama in the chat somewhere.
I talk about Obama a lot because I have this theory that America has this very particular archetype. I think because of its history, which I call the preacher. Always have it. You have Chris Rock, you have Obama, you have Jordan Peterson, like tall, skinny guy. He's really sad for you and disappointed, but now he will like tell you what to do, and you feel both ashamed.
Wait, Chris Rock does that?
Chris Rock doesn't quite fit in that lineup for me, but I see the rest of them.
Don't be mistaken by the humor there. All stand-up comedians are moralists. They have very particular. I mean, Dave Chappelle. I mean, he is a moralist, right?
Oh, he's definitely yeah. He's also Muslim. Interestingly.
I'm fascinated. Lakoff has this idea, the strict father as an archetype, and I always think, but in America, it's like post-Puritan, the preacher figure.
Well, that's what we want all of our presidents to do, and that's why we elected him. Yeah, no. When I did a follow-up to this essay to ask people who like a male role model or male archetype would be, and Barack Obama came up a lot. Lucas, tell us about your masculinity.
We're going to Germany.
Yeah. So I don't really have a role model, you could say, but I think I was never someone who was. I think I was always someone who was like very much focused on like myself and finding my own way. So I know that a lot of people they have these like role models that they aspire to, but I don't think I ever had that in a way, and maybe I'm having it even more now. I mean, definitely there are people who inspire me, but their gender does never play any role in this. Like I have a lot of women that I look up to and say, okay, these are inspiring people, and maybe even more so thinking about that they probably have faced some barriers that men in their position haven't placed. So I think they are even more appreciated. So yeah, that's
Lucas is so evolved.
Huh?
Lucas is so evolved. I'm impressed.
Yeah, I don't know if I am. The one
3 years in
so,
Interintellect, this is what it does to you.
yeah.
Like to
And I mean,
that.
even like Interintellect, that's like a female-led community in a way, Anna. And I mean, you are definitely an inspiration in a way.
And we're 60% men in Interintellect, which is very low for the tech community. It's usually, I mean, you can't tell this today because it's a very special salon with a lot of men in attendance.
Yeah. So
yeah,
role models, I can't say. And also I think for me, I have never thought much of my of like being man or being male as an identity. It's more, okay, this is just, it's for me, it's more a biological reality. So so I was born male. I've sometimes thought about this. Okay, would I be any different? Would I do anything different if I was born female? I'm not sure. I think I have like a little bit like a post-gender idea of it. And in terms of what do I need, and maybe that goes into this. I think especially when it comes to things like what we already talked about, like dating and romance, and that I feel because all the things have because things have changed. I think like and I don't know how to say this, but I think I would like to see, now that we have mostly achieved or like our strive for gender equality, I would like to see more women taking an active role in the formation of relations. I think that a lot of women are still in this universe, say, okay, even though I have all the rights that men have. I can, I don't know, I can run a company, I can become a politician, I can do everything that men can, but the man still has to do the first step when it comes to going on a date, for example. And I feel like this is something where our norms could catch up, because I think that would also be a part of
Okay,
equality.
sorry guys, I'm gonna have to step in here. This is actually something I do have strong feelings about. I actually don't think it's appropriate to split the bill on a first date. I don't think like there part of the thing, like there should be norms. Like some of our norms are good. I mean, there is something to be said for chivalry. I hear from my female friends that a lot of guys will not like just do what guys have done throughout history, which is, there's got to be some, like, we're not all the same. Gender roles matter. And I maybe this is because I'm Arab, like for us, like there's a sense of honor and kind of even among men, like even if I'm having dinner or coffee with a guy friend who's Arab, there is going to be a fight over the bill. And that is actually, I think, a very, like, there's something to be said for that. And here I'm hearing about like white guys in the dating scene in DC who aren't treating the women on date number one. This is incredible to me that this is actually like a real thing.
for you, you have your competitive advantage. It's great.
Wait,
for you.
let's let Kevin get into work, because we haven't heard from him and he had his hand up, and then we can return to this question.
First of all, where I come from also, like if there's a woman in the room, the man will get into a physical fight over the bill, and that's as it should be.
I love that. I love that for
May
them.
the strongest pay, and he shall be honored.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I switched to mobile. But yeah, I was gonna say, in terms of the question about the role models, one that I was kind of thinking about as we were talking is, I think at least.
Oh no.
No, Kevin, no. At the most
Tying of role models, I think
Wait, you just broke up like right then. Can you say that again? You just broke up for a minute right then.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Let's see.
It's like, now I'm going to
Maybe
share the secret to life
desktop
is
again. Hold on, let me switch back to desktop. Maybe this will be better.
Well, we can hear you now. You could.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Oh, okay.
Save while you can.
Okay, got it. Yeah, I was saying, I think for my generation, or maybe at least speaking for me personally growing up, there was this crop of people of like online entrepreneurs that sort of became role models of Tim Ferriss and Ramit Sethi, Mark Manson, people who sort of like kind of made their own way online and didn't necessarily define themselves in terms of masculinity, but I think maybe there's some element of like entrepreneurship and business and taking control of one's destiny that was inspiring to me at least.
Yeah, in the follow-up piece, like I asked who are role models and like what qualities came up when you thought
Yeah,
of like
so once I got it.
maleness
Yeah,
and
go ahead.
masculinity, and one of them, a thing that came up a lot was this question of like either purpose or like taking control of your self-mastery or mastery of like your situation or your future. And like specific, like that very specifically, it often looked like building something or like building yourself in a way. Like that, I think that was part of where the like whole weightlifting thing sort of stems from. But this idea of like having a thing to do and just like deciding to do it and like initiative, I guess, and agency was a really big like definition of maleness, or a way that people identified, like a quality that people identified with masculinity and being an adult man, which is again not to say that like women don't take agency or go after things or whatever, but I don't think that when most women, and I'm speaking for myself and you can totally correct me, it's like, what does it mean to be a woman? It means like go out and start your own company. Like I don't know that that's the first thing that comes up, or like go out and like go on a quest. Yeah, that's kind of a side note.
This is a
But
beautiful, beautiful ending actually, because we're at time. We're happy to. I'm happy to stay for a little bit longer, but I just want to be respectful of our guest time. It's really interesting, and I think there were multiple queries in the chat that we should do this for women as well. So Shadi, Christine, if you're happy to do a similar conversation, but I want to see the same amount of men. Okay. Like
it can't be an all women.
Women know what's up. Okay, we don't have to talk about it more. I think that would be really interesting. We could do like a no video, no filter, frank conversation about what actually going.
Jennifer Banks should come back for that. Like I was saying in the chat that the natality one was actually like a little bit about that in a sense.
I will invite a couple of people specifically because I know that they're on very different ends of the thread spectrum, and it's going to be, I think, very interesting.
Cool. Thank you everyone for coming out. This was really fascinating.
Yeah, thank you. This is great. Yeah.
Any closing notes, Shadi?
No,
As
but
a man,
if any of you are if any of you are about to go on a date tonight, please do pay. Please.
I think the vast majority of women are okay with being paid for, and even women who are like, if they choose to be offended by that, that seems like a them problem, not a you problem.
And even if they actually, I'll just save what I was about to say. It's probably no, never mind.
Oh, come on, you got to say it now, and then we'll
look.
off.
I think there can be a kind of a performative aspect to this kind of like false offense at guys paying the bill. Like I just don't like that maybe that I don't know. I don't buy it. I don't buy it. But maybe it's also a cultural thing, as someone else said. I guess it's called going Dutch. I don't know if the Dutch are the ones who came up with the idea of splitting the bill. But to do that is interesting. That's an interesting point.
Women pay a lot to go on dates in terms of like time spent getting ready, time that you spend like on clothing, on makeup, on like getting there, on the sort of tax to your safety, like you're meeting up with a strange man, like what could happen. And I think that some of those are undervalued by those factors may be undervalued by men who are like, what? It's just like, it's equal. Like, I don't know, man.
That's a really good point.
You rolled out of your house in like a t-shirt and shorts.
Yeah.
I just spent an hour like trying to get ready for this. You could at least buy me a coffee.
And if the guy is also proposing where to meet, he's gonna like most likely be lazy and do it somewhere that's like very accessible to him, and the woman's gonna have to come from wherever and order an Uber and all of that. I mean, yeah.
That is a separate problem.
Also,
we should have a dating Interintellect soon.
I mean, people keep getting married in Interintellect, and we have a singles mingle coming up. But I just want to add one thing.
Well, Shadi and I are both single, so
yeah, please
yeah,
come.
hey.
It's going to be amazing. We have 2 wonderful hosts. I think also there's a big wisdom about food, which is that a well-fed woman is much more open to love, whereas for a man, it doesn't matter. Like you can have a man who has been starving for 2 days and he'll be ready. Also on that note, we will wrap up this conversation.
We're gonna need a whole follow-up for that one.
Yeah. Just the gastronomical incentives of love. I love this so much, and we will definitely continue in some form.
Yeah.
And do come
Thanks
to
so
the
much, Anna.
single. It's going to be great. Take care, guys.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.